the Great Emu War, when Australia took on nature's unstoppable army. In the dry, sprawling farmlands of Western Australia in 1932, a peculiar war unfolded. This was not a war against another nation or even a rebellion. It was a war against emus, large flightless birds native to the Australian outback. What began as a desperate attempt by farmers to save their crops from a feathered invasion soon escalated into one of the most bizarre and infamous military campaigns in history. This is the tale of the Great Emu War, a clash where the enemy proved to be too fast, too clever, and ultimately too resilient. The Great Depression had swept across the globe, and Australia was no exception. The country's wheat farmers, many of them World War I veterans granted land through government settlement schemes, were facing dire circumstances. Wheat prices had plummeted, and these soldiers-turned-farmers were barely scraping by. To make matters worse, their farmland became the perfect feeding ground for emus during their annual migration. Tens of thousands of these towering birds, standing 6 feet tall and capable of running at speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour, descended upon the fields. They trampled fences, ate crops, and competed with livestock for water. The farmers, already struggling to make ends meet, were overwhelmed. They petitioned the government for help, demanding action against the invading feathered hordes. The government's response was unprecedented. They would send soldiers armed with machine guns to handle the problem. The plan for war. Enter Major G.P.W. Meredith, a seasoned officer in the Royal Australian Artillery, tasked with leading the campaign. Accompanying him were 2 soldiers equipped with Lewis guns, light machine guns capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute. They brought with them 10,000 rounds of ammunition, fully expecting to decimate the emu population quickly. The plan was simple: track down the emus, set up ambushes, and mow them down. Local farmers eagerly awaited their victory. The first battle, emu ingenuity on display. The campaign began in early November near the Campion district, where a large group of emus had been spotted congregating near a dam. The soldiers set up an ambush, their machine guns trained on the unsuspecting birds. At first, it seemed like an easy victory. As the soldiers opened fire, the emus scattered in all directions. What followed was a comedy of errors. The machine guns jammed after only a few bursts. The emus, with their incredible speed and unpredictable movements, proved nearly impossible to hit. By the end of the first encounter, only a handful of birds were killed, and the rest had disappeared into the bush. Major Meredith quickly realized that the emus were no ordinary adversaries. They moved in small, scattered groups, making them difficult to target en masse. Worse, they seemed to learn from each encounter, avoiding areas where the soldiers were stationed. Determined to turn the tide, Meredith ordered the troops to adopt a more aggressive strategy. They mounted one of the machine guns on the back of a truck, planning to chase the emus across the farmland. This, too, ended in disaster. The truck could not navigate the rough terrain, bouncing uncontrollably over rocks and ruts. The gunner, unable to aim properly, fired wildly, hitting nothing but dirt. Meanwhile, the emus easily outran the vehicle, vanishing into the distance. It was a humiliating failure. For weeks, the soldiers continued their efforts, but the results were pitiful. Entire volleys of machine gun fire often resulted in only a few kills. The emus' erratic movements, combined with the limitations of the weaponry, rendered the military powerless against them. By the end of November, after nearly a month of sporadic skirmishes, the results were grim. The soldiers had expended over 2,500 rounds of ammunition and managed to kill only about 50 emus. The birds, undeterred, continued to ravage the farmland. The operation had become a national embarrassment, with newspapers mocking the government's inability to win a war against birds. Major Meredith, reflecting on the campaign, reportedly said, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." In early December, the government officially called off the operation. The emus had won. The aftermath. Lessons from the feathered fiasco. The failure of the Great Emu War did little to solve the farmers' problems. The emu population continued to grow and the damage to crops persisted. The government eventually resorted to offering bounties to hunters, which proved more effective than machine guns in controlling the population. Over time, the story of the Great Emu War took on a life of its own. It became a humorous anecdote in Australian history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating nature, and a reminder of humanity's hubris. Why the emus won? Several factors contributed to the emu's victory. Speed and agility. Emus could outrun and outmaneuver the soldiers with ease. Group tactics. The birds instinctively scattered into smaller groups, making large-scale ambushes ineffective. Adaptability. The emus quickly learned to avoid areas where soldiers were present. Poor planning. The operation was poorly thought out, with limited understanding of the terrain and the bird's behavior. A symbol of resilience. Today, the Great Emu War is celebrated as one of the quirkiest chapters in Australian history. It has inspired books, documentaries, and even comedy sketches, with the emus often portrayed as wily underdogs, triumphing against human arrogance. Though it was a disaster for the military, it left behind an unforgettable legacy, proving that sometimes even an army with machine guns is no match for nature's ingenuity.